The Jody Arias trial is coming to a close. Yesterday, the jury heard the prosecutor describe Jody Arias as a, quote, sophisticated liar who knew she was coming to kill. Today, defense lawyer Kirk Nurmi told the jury during his closing arguments, quote, "It's not about whether or not you like Jody Arias. 9 days out of 10, I don't like Jody Arias, but that doesn't matter." He was imploring jurors to take an impartial view of the case, and his client, of course, that was circulating like wildfire on Twitter. And joining us now to discuss this is trial attorney Richard Roth and president of Confidential Security and Investigations, Robert Seiden. Richard, just give us, if you can, a recap of the case. I believe you may be muted because I see your mouth moving. If you could unmute yourself, as is often the case.
My apologies.
No worries.
There's so much to say. It is a 4-month-long trial. There has been a litany of witnesses that have been on the stand, several fact witnesses, several expert witnesses, witnesses that have examined the evidence. Remember, we have, I think the one word that would describe this case, it's a gruesome, gruesome case. Several stab wounds, a slit of the throat, a gunshot. There have been investigators, there have been friends that have testified. And so what's happening now, and what the trial lawyer's job is, to actually take all of that 4 months and put it together and wrap it up in a bow and walk into the juries and tell jurors, you have to believe my story and here's why. And There's a lot to choose from for both of them.
So I just want to draw your attention to the live blog. They took a short recess now. This is at 4:05. This is from Nurmi, the defense attorney here, saying, "You're the finder of fact," saying this to the jury. "You determine what happened. You have more options than first-degree murder." So, you know, after detailing the possible verdicts, that's what he's saying. Rob, as a prosecutor, explain to us how prosecutor Juan Martinez laid out his case.
Well, first of all, the prosecution here has an enormous job to be able to put forth hundreds of exhibits, dozens and dozens of witnesses, as Richard was stating before. This is a monumental task to be able to keep a jury's attention for 4 months on something that is as horrific as a crime that occurred. The level of detail that the prosecution goes into when presenting this case is really something that the average person, the average juror, would have a hard time remembering. Facts that occurred 4 months ago, testimony from months before. It's almost impossible. So the task that the prosecution has, just as the defense does, is to try and recall the evidence for the jury so that they can form opinions and come to conclusions based on facts that were laid out over the course of time. That's a very difficult thing to do. This case, in my opinion, is it's not as challenging for the prosecution as it is for the defense.
Right. The
prosecution here has a very strong case based on the physical evidence, where you have a person who's interposing a self-defense claim, which is what this Jody is doing here. She's saying that she was defending herself, but the evidence of the crime scene shows that not only did she stab him dozens of times, but she slit his throat, which is usually a crime of passion when someone slices someone else's throat. It's not something you do to defend yourself. And also then she subsequently shot him. So that's pretty damning evidence that the defense is trying to overcome.
Right.
Couple that with the fact that she also lied to the police and told 3 separate stories after the crime occurred. She's going to have to dig herself out of that as well, and the defense has a tough job with that.
Right, and you know, speaking about the defense, I mean, let's just take another quick update. This is just a minute ago. The sex tape is being played now, a recording of the May 10th, 2008 sex conversation between Arias and Alexander, specifically where Alexander talks about Arias sounding like a 12-year-old girl having her first orgasm. I mean, you know, you're outlining that it's a difficult, perhaps uphill battle for the defense attorney, Kirk Nurmi, but Nurmi has argued that the case is not, as we said, about liking Arias, but the court of public opinion seems to have already found her guilty based on her inconsistencies. I mean, does that play out inside the courtroom as well, or not really?
Well, if you're asking me, you don't know what plays out in the courtroom. As I said, you take the 12 jurors who are sitting there who have to try and recollect all this evidence. And generally that what they do is, I was a prosecutor, I tried 55 cases. And I remember after speaking to jurors after the trial, I know Richard's tried many, many cases as well. He can probably attest to this as well. Jurors generally remember key points, and they don't remember nuanced details about things. And the key big picture points here are that she lied to the police, are that she had that the physical evidence is really overwhelming in terms of how much more injured he was, his body, compared to her with a few minor wounds. The jury sees that and they get overwhelmed with the amount of evidence that was presented to them. And it's not that the prosecution wants to just pour on the evidence. A lot of times people don't realize it. They have to put evidence on for issues like chain of custody and laying foundations for certain evidence that has to go in. And so it takes time to put on witnesses to do that. But at the end of the day, the only thing the average person is going to remember are the big picture things here.
Right.
Really difficult for her to be able to, her defense team, to be able to somehow rebut the inconsistent statements that she made and the overwhelming physical evidence.
Right, and when you talk about those inconsistent statements, Richard, I'm curious, the defense attorney, Nurmi's described the relationship as a chaotic relationship, a love-hate one. There's also this notion that she's smiling at awkward times in the courtroom. We have this picture of her, I'm just going to zoom in there. Do you think that could convict her? Does that factor into these kinds of cases at all? The creepy nature of the crime and so on and so forth?
Absolutely, because not only do the jurors sit there and listen to the evidence as it comes in person by person for 4 months, but they get to see her and they get to hear her reaction. And is she upset? Is she mad? Is she laughing during times where she shouldn't be laughing? There's been some very gruesome photos of her ex-husband, of Mr. Alexander, ex-boyfriend, Mr. Alexander, and if she's laughing during those times, the jurors are going to look at her and say, there's something wrong. But there are, as much as the defense does have a tough time, we agree on that, there are several things that it will be arguing. Number one, it will be arguing that we have to dissect those 3 minutes between where we know he was alive and we know he was dead. Number two, they've come up with this entire battered girlfriend syndrome, this domestic violence syndrome, and showing how she was the victim and not him. They have experts to testify to that. So they do have a lot of defenses. And that one tweet that you show that said, this is not just about a first-degree case. It's a first-degree and a second-degree. First-degree murder is premeditated murder in this state, meaning did she plan the murder?
Right.
Second-degree is heat of passion. And one of the things one of the main arguments by the defense counsel is that when she walked into that room that day, she had over a dozen opportunities to kill him with the knife, and she didn't. And they're going to argue that this should not be a first-degree murder conviction. Right.
And that was what we just saw on the live blog, that distinction being made by the defense attorney. Very quickly, do you think there's any way she'll get off at all?
I mean, if I'm a betting man, I think it's a second-degree murder conviction.
I would agree. I think she's getting convicted, but it's not going to be first degree.
Well, fantastic. I'm going to agree with both of you because you know a lot more about this than I do. And we have another story coming out of Boston today. The DNA and fingerprints found on explosive fragments at the scene of the Boston Marathon bombing do not match those of the elder terror suspect's wife, Catherine Russell, according to reports. Russell, the widow of the elder brother, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, initially came under scrutiny when authorities discovered female DNA on a piece of pressure cooker used to construct a homemade bomb. Richard, Rob, what does this find mean for the investigation, if anything?
Rob, you want to go first?
Rob?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's great that the police are allowing this information to be public. Normally, they keep this type of stuff confidential, but it seems that there's a lot of transparency in this case. But it's interesting. They're cracking down on every lead that they get, trying to find out if there's any potential lead they can use here. If they had found her DNA, it would have been great leverage for them against her. I think they're trying to find out to what extent she may have been involved in either assisting before or during the actual event. So it's important for the police to get leverage in order to get people to cooperate. That's a card here they can't play, apparently.
Right. And Richard, your reaction to that?
Sure. I mean, they want to know exactly what went down. And people would think it's very hard to believe that the wife of a murderer of a terrorist wouldn't know with pressure cookers and the things he put in the pressure cookers. There were several pressure cookers, not the two, just the two that went off. And how could she not know? So trying to understand how a guy could develop these and prepare them in his home with his wife not knowing. On the one hand, you would think it's a pretty preposterous. On the other hand, we've learned that she is a healthcare provider. She does work 70 to 80 hours a week. He was the one before he passed away who took care of the child at home. So the investigators are trying to dig as deep as they can to see who actually was involved in this murder. And
not to bring too much light to the topic, but many a husband has hidden many a thing from his or her wife. So there you have that. Thank you though both for joining us. Really appreciate it. You're watching HuffPost Live. Much more coming up. Stay tuned.